The woman you're about to throw out is my wife." The voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the noisy air of L'Etoile like a shard of ice. Every jeering laugh, every mocking whisper died instantly. Julian Vance, the arrogant manager, froze on the spot, the condescending smirk on his lips turning to stone. The large security guard holding Zara's arm snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, quickly letting go. Just seconds ago, it felt as if the entire world was against Zara Okoye. Surrounded by judgmental eyes, humiliated for her simple clothes and the faint streak of paint on her hand, she had stood alone, as resilient as a lighthouse in a storm. But now the storm had changed direction. Noah Bennett stood there, tall and silent in his navy suit, his very presence shifting the gravity in the room. His eyes, which were always warm when he looked at her, were now as cold as ice, locked onto Julian. He didn't need to shout. His silent fury was more terrifying than any threat. And in that moment, everyone in L'Etoile knew they had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. If a story of quiet strength and a love that shatters prejudice resonates with you, then you're in the right place. No matter what time it is or where you're watching from, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this unfolds. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone completely underestimated another person, only to be proven spectacularly wrong? Share your story with us. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across the cracked pavement of Eastside Community Arts Center, a modest brick building tucked in a corner of the city where dreams clung to life like stubborn weeds. Zara Okoye pushed through the glass door, her sneakers scuffing against the worn linoleum. A faint streak of cobalt paint clung to her slender fingers, a remnant of the afternoon spent guiding a dozen kids through a mural project. Her dark, curly hair, neatly tied back, bounced slightly as she moved, her face set with purpose. She wore a simple cotton t-shirt and jeans, practical choices for a day of paintbrushes and laughter. But now they felt like a flimsy shield against the task ahead. Zara glanced at her watch, 4:45 p.m. Her heart gave a quick, anxious thud. The gala was in 3 hours, and the centerpiece of tonight's charity auction, a custom cake from L'Etoile, the city's most exclusive restaurant, was still waiting to be picked up. The cake wasn't just dessert. It was a symbol of hope for the kids her nonprofit served, a promise of funding for art supplies, music lessons, and safe spaces. She couldn't let them down, not tonight. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to the confirmation email from L'Etoile's manager. The order was paid, and the pickup time was set. Simple enough, she thought, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Her husband, Noah Bennett, had wanted to come along, but he was tied up in a high-stakes meeting with a major investor. "You've got this, Zara," he'd said that morning, his voice steady, his hand warm on hers. She smiled at the memory, drawing strength from it. Noah's quiet support was her anchor, even if his world of tech billions felt a universe away from her paint-splattered one. The drive to L'Etoile was a blur of city streets, the skyline shifting from gritty storefronts to gleaming towers. Zara's old hatchback rattled as she pulled into the valet area of the restaurant, its glass facade reflecting the fading sun like a sheet of ice. She stepped out, smoothing her t-shirt, aware of the contrast between her casual attire and the polished surroundings. A valet in a crisp black uniform glanced at her, his expression unreadable and she handed over her keys with a polite nod. No time for nerves. She had a job to do. Inside her bag, the weight of the gala's expectations pressed against her. The auction wasn't just about money. It was about proving her organization's worth to a city quick to dismiss her kids as troubled or hopeless. She thought of little Amari, who'd painted a sunflower today, her shy grin brighter than the colors on the canvas. That grin was why Zara was here, why she'd brave the cold elegance of L'Etoile for a cake that could fund a year of classes. As she approached the restaurant's entrance, her steps faltered. The doors, framed in polished brass, loomed like a gateway to another world. She caught her reflection in the glass, slender, determined, the faint paint streak on her hand a quiet badge of her work. For a moment she wondered if she should have changed, put on something fancier, but there'd been no time. And besides, this was who she was, Zara Okoye, who built futures with her hands, not her wardrobe. She pushed the thought aside and reached for the door. A sudden gust of laughter stopped her. Two guests, a couple in tailored evening wear, brushed past her as they exited. The woman's diamond earrings glinted, and the man's suit screamed wealth. They glanced at Zara, their eyes sliding over her jeans and sneakers. The woman's lips curled into a smirk, and she leaned toward her companion, murmuring, "She thinks she's dining here?" The man chuckled, low and mocking, before they disappeared into a waiting car. Zara's jaw tightened. She'd felt those looks before, judgments that weighed her skin, her clothes, her very existence. But she wasn't here to prove herself to them. She was here for the kids, for Amari's sunflower, for the gala that could change everything. She squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening like steel. The door swung open under her touch, and she stepped into L'Etoile's foyer. The air was cool, scented with lavender and wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across marble floors, and the hum of conversation from the dining room carried an edge of exclusivity. Zara's sneakers squeaked faintly, a small rebellion against the silence of privilege. She approached the hostess stand, where a young woman with red hair tied in a ponytail stood, her name tag reading Clara. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and unease. "Hi," Zara said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to pick up a custom order for the East Side Community Arts Gala. It's under Okoye." Clara's fingers hesitated over the tablet in front of her, her gaze flickering to Zara's paint-streaked hand. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across the stand. A man in a tailored vest, his blonde hair slicked back, stepped forward. His name tag read, "Julian Vance Manager." His gray eyes raked over Zara, cold and dismissive, as if she were a smudge on the restaurant's pristine reputation. The admission landed like a stone, final and undeniable. Julian's face flushed, his earlier bravado gone. He opened his mouth, but no defense came. The security guard, who'd moments ago been ready to escort Zara out, stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. The room felt smaller, the chandelier's light dimmer, as the truth stripped away L'Etoile's polished facade. Eleanor turned to Julian, her expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "You've forgotten what matters," she said. "This restaurant was built on excellence, yes, but also on integrity. You judged Zara by her appearance, not her actions. You failed to see her worth, and that's a failure of character." She paused, her eyes softening as she looked at Zara. "But you, Zara, have shown more strength than anyone in this room. Your work, your heart, that's what defines you. Zara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She thought of Amari's sunflower, Malik's piano notes, the kids waiting for her to deliver. This wasn't just about a cake anymore. It was about proving that worth wasn't tied to wealth or appearance. Noah's hand squeezed her shoulder, a silent vow of support, and she drew strength from it. Julian stood silent, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his aunt's words sinking in. For the first time, he looked small, stripped of the arrogance that had fueled his cruelty. The diners, too, were quiet, their earlier laughter replaced by an awkward stillness. A couple at a corner table gathered their coats, their faces tight with discomfort, as if eager to escape the scene they'd helped create. Zara took a deep breath, her mind already turning to the gala. The cake was still hers to claim, but this moment demanded more than victory. It demanded change. She looked at Julian, seeing not just a bully, but a man trapped by his own insecurities, and an idea began to form. The fight wasn't over, but the path forward was clearer, and she knew exactly how to walk it. The silence in L'Etoile's foyer lingered, heavy with the weight of exposed truths. Zara Okoye stood tall, Noah Bennett's hand a steady presence on her shoulder, while Eleanor Vance's rebuke still echoed, stripping away Julian Vance's arrogance. The dining room, once alive with mocking laughter, now sat subdued, the patrons' eyes averted, their earlier amusement replaced by shame. Clara, the young hostess, clutched the tablet, her quiet apology, "I'm sorry, Ms. Okoye," hanging in the air like a fragile bridge. The custom cake for Zara's gala, the heart of her mission for Eastside Community Arts, was within reach. But this moment demanded more than a simple victory. It demanded transformation. Zara took a slow breath, her mind racing past the sting of Julian's cruelty and the diner's scorn. She saw Amari's sunflower painting, Malik's halting piano notes, and the kids who trusted her to fight for their futures. This wasn't just about proving Julian wrong. It was about showing him, and everyone in this room, what true worth meant. She stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant, cutting through the tension. "This doesn't have to end with anger," she said, her eyes meeting Julian's. "You made a mistake, but you can make it right. Bring the cake to my gala tonight. Volunteer for one evening. See the kids we're helping. See what this is really about." The room stirred, a ripple of surprise passing through the diners. Julian blinked, his pale face caught between defiance and shame. His hands twitched, the polished veneer of his tailored vest no longer a shield. "Volunteer?" he muttered, his voice barely audible, as if the idea were foreign, absurd. But Eleanor's sharp gaze held him, her silence a command to listen. Noah's hand tightened briefly on Zara's shoulder, his expression softening with pride. He knew her heart, her ability to turn pain into possibility, and he stayed silent, letting her lead. Eleanor nodded slightly, her pearl earrings glinting as she spoke. "That's more grace than you deserve, Julian," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Take the chance. Learn something." Her words carried the weight of a mentor, not just an aunt, urging him toward redemption. Julian's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the tablet, to Clara, to the diners who now watched with curiosity rather than mockery. The woman in the velvet dress leaned forward, her earlier laughter forgotten. The man with the gold watch shifted, his discomfort plain. Clara, her red ponytail still, looked at Zara with something like awe, her guilt easing into hope. The security guard stood back, his role in the drama over, his face unreadable. Zara held Julian's gaze, her voice steady. "It's not about me. she said. It's about kids who need someone to believe in them. You could be that person tonight. Her words were an invitation, not an accusation, and they landed softly like a seed planted in uncertain soil. You must be lost, Julian said, his voice smooth but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. This isn't the place for whatever it is you're looking for. Zara's pulse quickened, but she held his gaze. She'd faced worse than this. She opened her mouth to explain, to show the email, to stand her ground. But the air in L'Etoile seemed to thicken, the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her. She wasn't just picking up a cake anymore. She was walking into a fight she hadn't chosen, one that would test every ounce of her strength. And she was ready. Zara Okoye stood firm at the hostess stand of L'Etoile, her heart still stinging from the couple's mocking laughter outside. The memory of their smirks, she thinks she's dining here, clung to her like damp air, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. The gala was ticking closer, and the cake she needed for the auction waited somewhere behind these polished walls. She wasn't here to prove her worth to strangers. She was here for the kids who painted their dreams at her community center. The foyer of L'Etoile gleamed with an icy grandeur. Chandeliers glittered overhead, their light fracturing across marble floors, and the murmur of diners carried the weight of wealth. Zara's sneakers, still dusted with the grit of her East Side studio, felt like an intrusion in this pristine world. She tightened her grip on her phone, the confirmation email ready to back her up, and met the eyes of Clara, the young hostess with red hair tied back in a nervous ponytail. Clara's fingers hovered over her tablet, her expression caught between politeness and unease, as if sensing a storm brewing. I have an order for pickup, Zara repeated, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. It's for the East Side Community Arts Gala under Okoye, paid in full. Clara nodded quickly, her eyes darting to the tablet as she tapped the screen. Let me check, she began, but her words were cut off by a sharp voice slicing through the air. No need to check anything. Julian Vance, the manager, stepped closer, his tailored vest hugging his lean frame, his blonde hair gleaming under the chandelier's glow. His gray eyes swept over Zara, her simple t-shirt, her jeans, the faint streak of paint on her hand, with a disdain so palpable it seemed to chill the room. You're clearly in the wrong place, he said, his tone smooth but laced with venom. We don't handle unsolicited visitors here. Zara's breath caught, not from fear, but from the familiar sting of being sized up and found wanting. She'd faced this before, eyes that judged her skin, her clothes, her very presence, but it never got easier. Still she straightened, her resolve a quiet fire. I'm not a visitor, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. I'm here for a custom cake ordered and paid for. I can show you the confirmation. Julian's lips curled into a smirk, his head tilting as if she'd told a mildly amusing joke. A cake? He said, his voice loud enough to draw glances from nearby diners. A couple at a corner table, their wine glasses paused midair, exchanged amused looks. This is L'Etoile. Our chef doesn't waste time on charity handouts. The word charity landed like a slap, and Zara felt her cheeks flush, not from shame, but from a rising anger she fought to keep in check. She thought of Amari, the girl whose sunflower painting had lit up the studio today, and the dozens of kids like her who needed the funds this gala would raise. She wouldn't let this man's arrogance derail their future. It's not a handout, she said, her tone sharpening. It's a paid order for a gala that supports kids' education. I have the email right here. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with the confirmation from L'Etoile's own system. Clara glanced at it, her eyes widening slightly, but before she could speak, Julian waved a dismissive hand. Anyone can fake an email, he said, his smirk widening. Do you even know where you are? This isn't some corner bakery. A ripple of laughter spread through the dining room. A man in a suit at a nearby table leaned toward his companion, whispering something that made her chuckle behind her napkin. Zara's pulse pounded in her ears, but she held Julian's gaze, refusing to shrink. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron, her silence louder than words. Zara saw the flicker of guilt in the girl's eyes, but it wasn't enough to change the tide. I know exactly where I am, Zara said, her voice low but cutting. And I know my order is real. Check your system, or get someone who can. Julian's smirk faltered for a split second, replaced by a flash of irritation. He stepped closer, looming over the hostess stand, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You're wasting my time and disturbing our guests, he said. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out. Julian, oblivious to their arrival, leaned closer to Zara, his voice dripping with contempt. You think waving a phone around makes you belong here? This is my house, and I decide who stays. The guard tugged at Zara's arm, pulling her a step closer to the door. The diner's laughter swelled, a woman in a velvet dress chuckling loudest, her wine glass glinting like a trophy. Zara didn't flinch. You're wrong, she said, her voice a blade of conviction. Your system has my order. Your chef took my money. This isn't about me. It's about kids who deserve better than your ego. Her words silenced a few diners, their smiles faltering, but Julian's face twisted with fury. Enough, he snapped, nodding to the guard. Take her out. Noah's restraint snapped. He stepped into the foyer, his tall frame commanding the space, his eyes locked on Zara. She hadn't seen him yet, her focus on Julian, but the room felt his presence, a shift from mockery to unease. Eleanor followed, her expression a storm of disappointment, her gaze fixed on Julian. The stage was set, the tension a taut wire ready to snap, and Zara, still fighting, was about to find her allies in the shadows. Zara Okoye stood defiant in the foyer of L'Etoile, the security guard's grip firm on her arm, urging her toward the brass doors. Julian Vance's final command, take her out, rang in her ears, a dismissal that carried the weight of every sneer and whisper from the dining room. The patron's laughter, sharp and mocking, clawed at her, but she held her ground, her phone still raised with the glowing proof of her paid order. The cake for her gala, the lifeline for her kids at Eastside Community Arts, was slipping away, but Zara's resolve burned like a beacon. She wouldn't let Julian's prejudice win, not when Amari's sunflower and Malik's music hung in the balance. The air shifted, heavy with a new presence. Noah Bennett stepped fully into the foyer, his navy suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the chandelier's glow. His eyes, usually calm, blazed with a quiet fury as they locked on Zara, taking in the guard's hand on her arm, the smirk on Julian's face, the crowd's amusement. Behind him, Eleanor Vance emerged, her silver hair and pearl earrings catching the light, her expression a storm of disappointment. The dining room's chatter faltered, the weight of their arrival silencing the room like a curtain falling. Julian, oblivious to the shift, leaned toward Zara, his voice a venomous hiss. "You don't belong here," he said, his blond hair glinting as he gestured to the guard. "Get moving." The guard tugged again, pulling Zara a step closer to the exit. She planted her feet, her voice steady despite the pressure. "You're wrong, Julian. Check the order. You'll see." Before Julian could retort, Noah's voice cut through the tension, low and unyielding, like steel wrapped in silk. "The woman you're throwing out," he said, stepping forward, his tall frame commanding every eye in the room, "is my wife." He reached Zara's side in 2 strides, his hand finding her shoulder, warm and protective. His touch was a quiet promise, grounding her in the storm. Zara's eyes met his, a flicker of relief passing through her, though her defiance didn't waver. The room froze. The woman in the velvet dress lowered her wine glass. Her smile gone. The man with the gold watch shifted uncomfortably, his chuckle dying in his throat. Julian's smirk vanished, his gray eyes widening as he registered Noah's words. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His confidence crumbled under the weight of Noah's presence. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And she's my guest of honor tonight, Julian," she said, her eyes boring into her nephew. "Zara Okoye, the woman behind Eastside Community Arts, is the gala you're sabotaging with this disgraceful display. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Her words carried the authority of someone who'd built empires and broken egos, each syllable a rebuke that echoed through the silent dining room. Julian's face drained of color, his hands twitching at his sides. I didn't know," he stammered, his earlier bravado dissolving. He glanced at Zara, then at Noah, his gaze darting to the tablet Clara still clutched. The young hostess stood frozen, her red ponytail trembling, her eyes wide with the realization of the moment's gravity. Noah's hand tightened briefly on Zara's shoulder, his voice steady, but laced with controlled anger. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to check," he said, his eyes never leaving Julian. "You saw my wife, her clothes, her skin, and decided she didn't belong. You're not just wrong. You're failing everyone who trusted you to run this place." Julian laughed again, but it was hollow, a performance for the audience now leaning forward in their seats. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he said, his voice rising to ensure every diner heard. "This is my house, and you're not welcome." The guard was steps away now, his hand outstretched, ready to escort her out. Clara's eyes dropped to the floor, her silence a betrayal Zara felt, but didn't blame her for. The dining room held its breath, the tension thick enough to choke on. Zara stood alone, her defiance a beacon in the storm, knowing this moment would define everything that came next. She wasn't just fighting for a cake anymore. She was fighting for her place, her purpose, and the kids who believed in her. Zara Okoye stood rooted to the marble floor of L'Etoile's foyer, the security guards' heavy steps closing in like a drumbeat of defeat. Julian Vance's words, "You're not welcome," still echoed, amplified by the snickers of diners who watched her like a sideshow. The air was thick with their judgment, their eyes slicing through her simple t-shirt and jeans, lingering on the faint paint streak on her hand. But Zara's resolve burned brighter than their scorn. The gala was less than 2 hours away, and the cake she'd come for, the key to funding her community center's programs, was non-negotiable. She wouldn't leave without it. The guard, a towering figure in a black suit, loomed closer, his hand hovering near her arm. "Ma'am, you need to go," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, as if he were just following orders. Zara's pulse raced, but she held her ground, her dark eyes flashing with defiance. She raised her phone, the confirmation email glowing like a shield. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the hum of the dining room. "I paid for an order. It's right here. Check it." Julian's smirk twisted into a scowl, his blonde hair glinting as he leaned over the hostess stand. "You're embarrassing yourself," he snapped, his tone sharp enough to draw fresh giggles from a nearby table. A woman in a sequin dress whispered to her companion, her laughter ablaze in the air. "Enough with the fake emails. You're holding up my staff and ruining the evening for our real guests." Zara's chest tightened, the weight of his words pressing against her. She thought of Amari, whose sunflower painting had lit up the studio, and Malik, who'd stayed late to practice his chords. Their futures depended on this gala, on her ability to walk out with that cake. She wouldn't let Julian's prejudice or the crowd's amusement stop her. "It's not fake," she said, her voice rising clear and unyielding. "Your system has my order. Eastside Community Arts paid in full. Look it up or get someone who will." Clara, the young hostess with the red ponytail, flinched at Zara's words. Her fingers twitched over the tablet, where the order sat plain as day. She'd seen it herself when processing it days ago. But her eyes darted to Julian, fear gluing her lips shut. She twisted the edge of her apron, her silence a heavy presence. Zara caught the girl's guilty glance, a flicker of recognition that Clara knew the truth, but was too scared to speak. It stung, but Zara didn't have time to dwell on it. Julian stepped closer, his gray eyes cold as steel. "You're not just a nuisance, you're a liar," he said, his voice low and venomous, meant for her alone. "My father spent years making L'Etoile a name. I won't let someone like you drag it down with your sob story." The jab at his father revealed a crack in his armor, a hint of the pressure he felt to uphold a legacy. But Zara didn't care about his insecurities. She cared about the kids. "I'm not lying," she said, holding her phone higher, the email a beacon of proof. "Your chef agreed to this order. It's for kids who need art, music, a chance. You'd know that if you bothered to check." Her words carried a quiet power, enough to make a few diners pause, their forks stilled, their amusement wavering. But Julian wasn't swayed. He snapped his fingers at the guard. "Get her out, now." The guard's hand grazed Zara's arm, a gentle but firm nudge toward the door. The dining room's whisper swelled, a mix of mockery and curiosity. A man in a pinstripe suit leaned forward, his smirk wide, while his date giggled behind her hand. Zara's heart pounded, her mind racing. She could call Noah, but he was in a meeting, likely still in this very building, unaware of the scene unfolding. She could walk away, regroup, find another way. But that would mean delaying the gala, letting down her kids, and giving Julian the victory he craved. No, she'd built Eastside Community Arts from nothing, faced skeptics and setbacks, and never backed down. This was no different. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice a blade of conviction, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Check the order, Julian. You'll see I'm right, and you'll regret this." Zara felt the room's attention shift, the diner's amusement replaced by unease. She stood taller, her phone still in hand, the email a silent testament to her truth. "I came for a cake," she said, her voice clear, addressing not just Julian but the entire room, "for kids who need art, music, and a future. You could have helped them. Instead, you chose this." Eleanor's gaze softened as she looked at Zara, a mix of admiration and apology in her eyes. "You're absolutely right, Zara," she said, then turned to Julian, her tone icy. "You've embarrassed yourself and this establishment. My foundation funded that cake for tonight's gala, a gala you've now jeopardized. Fix this, or I'll ensure everyone knows why L'Etoile failed under your watch." Julian's jaw clenched, his eyes darting between Eleanor, Noah, and Zara. The guard, sensing the shift, released Zara's arm and stepped back, his face unreadable. Clara's hand shook as she gripped the tablet, her silence finally breaking. "The order, it's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Okoye, custom cake, paid in full. I processed it myself." The diner's whispers died completely, replaced by a heavy silence. The woman in the sequin dress looked away, her wineglass forgotten. The man in the pinstripe suit sank back in his chair, his smirk gone. Julian stood alone, exposed, his authority unraveling. Zara felt Noah's hand steady on her shoulder, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. But the battle wasn't over, not yet. The cake, the gala, and the truth still hung in the balance, and Zara knew the next moments would define whether justice or prejudice would prevail. The foyer of L'Etoile stood frozen, the air thick with the aftermath of Noah Bennett's declaration and Eleanor Vance's rebuke. Zara Okoye felt the weight of every eye in the dining room, their earlier laughter silenced, replaced by a tense stillness. Noah's hand rested on her shoulder, a steady anchor, while Eleanor's piercing gaze pinned her nephew, Julian Vance, like a specimen under glass. Julian's blonde hair, once a polished crown, seemed to wilt under the chandelier's glow, his gray eyes darting as his confidence crumbled. The custom cake for Zara's gala, the lifeline for her kids at Eastside Community Arts, remained out of reach. But the tide had turned. The truth was laid bare, and the room felt it. Eleanor's voice, sharp and unwavering, broke the silence. "You've disgraced this establishment, Julian," she said, her silver hair glinting as she stepped closer to the hostess stand. "Zara Okoye is not just a customer. She's a force for good, someone my foundation trusts to change lives. You judged her without a thought, and you've shamed us all." Her words carried the weight of years spent commanding boardrooms, each one a hammer, striking Julian's fragile ego. Julian's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. He glanced at the tablet Clara still held, her red ponytail trembling as she stood rigid, her earlier silence now a heavy burden. I didn't mean," Julian started, but his voice faltered, unconvincing even to himself. The diners, once eager for a spectacle, now shifted uncomfortably. The woman in the velvet dress stared at her plate, her wineglass untouched. The man with the gold watch leaned back, his smirk replaced by a grimace. Noah spoke, his voice low but cutting, his hand never leaving Zara's shoulder. "You didn't mean to what?" he said, his eyes locked on Julian. "Humiliate my wife? Dismiss her work? Or assume she didn't belong because of how she looks?" He didn't raise his voice, but the controlled anger in his tone sent a ripple through the room, silencing the last whispers. "That cake you refused to give her, it's for kids who need a chance. Kids your chef agreed to support. You failed them and you failed this place." Zara felt the room's attention shift to her, but she didn't shrink. She stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant, carrying the strength of every battle she'd fought for her community. "I didn't come here to fight," she said, addressing Julian but loud enough for all to hear. I came for a cake that could fund art, music, and hope for kids who've been written off. You could have been part of that. Instead, you chose to tear it down. Her words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. A few diners looked away, their earlier amusement now a source of shame. Clara's eyes, wide with guilt, met Zara's for a fleeting moment before dropping to the tablet. The young hostess took a shaky breath, then stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Ms. Okoye," she said, her hands trembling as she held out the tablet. "The order's real. I processed it myself. Custom cake, East Side Gala, paid in full. I should have said something sooner." Julian's jaw tightened, his smirk gone, replaced by a flash of anger. He turned to Clara, his voice a hiss. "Is she in the system or not? Answer me." Clara's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she tapped the tablet. She nodded faintly, barely audible. It's there, sir. Okoye, custom cake paid." For a moment, silence gripped the room. Julian's face froze, his confidence cracking. But he recovered quickly, his voice rising to drown out Clara's admission. "Doesn't matter," he said, waving a hand. "She's causing a scene. Get her out." The guard's grip tightened, pulling Zara toward the door. The diner's laughter returned, sharper now, a chorus of entitlement. Zara's defiance burned brighter, her eyes locked on Julian, promising she wouldn't forget this. She was one step from the exit, one step from losing the fight, when a new sound cut through the noise, a door opening, footsteps approaching, and a presence that shifted the air itself. Zara Okoye felt the security guard's grip tighten on her arm, pulling her toward the gleaming brass doors of L'Etoile. The dining room's laughter, sharp and cruel, followed her like a shadow, each chuckle a reminder of the judgment she'd faced since stepping into this place. Julian Vance's voice still rang in her ears. Get her out. His words a final dismissal of her purpose, her presence. The custom cake for her gala, the key to funding her kids' dreams at Eastside Community Arts, seemed further away than ever. But Zara's resolve held firm, her heart beating with the faces of Amari, Malik, and the others who trusted her to deliver. She wouldn't let them down, not even as the guard's heavy steps urged her toward the exit. Inside the restaurant's private dining room, hidden behind a carved oak door, Noah Bennett sat at a polished mahogany table, his navy suit crisp but understated. He'd just sealed a deal with Eleanor Vance, a formidable investor whose sharp eyes and silver hair commanded the room. Their meeting had been a triumph, millions secured for his tech venture. But Noah's mind was elsewhere. He'd texted Zara an hour ago, checking if she'd picked up the cake, and her lack of reply gnawed at him. She was supposed to be here at L'Etoile right now. His fingers tapped the table, a rare sign of unease for a man who thrived on control. Eleanor, mid-sentence about their next steps, paused. Her gaze flicked toward the door as the muffled sound of raised voices seeped through. "What is that racket?" she said, her voice clipped, her elegant frame rising from the chair. "This is L'Etoile, not a street market. I'll see what's causing this disruption." She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention, her pearl earrings catching the soft light. Noah stood, his instincts prickling. "I'll come with you," he said, his tone calm but firm. He couldn't shake the feeling that this had something to do with Zara. She was fierce, capable, but L'Etoile's elite world wasn't hers, and he knew how cruel it could be to those it deemed outsiders. He followed Eleanor, his long strides purposeful, his jaw set with a quiet intensity. As they approached the door, the noise grew clearer. Julian's sharp commands, the guard's low voice, and a woman's steady, defiant tone that Noah knew instantly. Zara. His heart lurched, a mix of pride and protective anger flaring. He quickened his pace, pushing past Eleanor to reach the foyer first. The scene that greeted him was a knife to the chest. Zara stood near the hostess stand, her slender frame unyielding despite the guard's hand on her arm. Her phone was raised, the screen glowing with proof of her order, but Julian loomed over her, his blonde hair glinting as he barked, "You're done here." Clara, the young hostess, stood frozen, her red ponytail trembling as she clutched the tablet, her silence a stark contrast to Zara's resolve. The diners watched, some smirking, others whispering, their amusement a toxic undercurrent. Eleanor stopped beside Noah, her sharp intake of breath audible. "Is that Zara Okoye?" she murmured, her voice a mix of shock and recognition. She knew Zara, not just as Noah's wife, but as the heart behind Eastside Community Arts, the organization Eleanor's foundation had backed for years. The gala tonight, with its custom cake from L'Etoile, was partly her doing, a gesture to support Zara's mission for underprivileged kids. Noah's eyes narrowed, his calm exterior cracking as he watched his wife stand alone against a room of scorn. He knew her strength. She'd built a nonprofit from nothing, faced skeptics with grace, but seeing her treated like this, dismissed for her clothes, her skin, her very existence, ignited something fierce in him. He took a step forward, his presence shifting the air, but Eleanor's hand grazed his arm, a silent signal to wait. She wanted to see how far this had gone, how deep the rot ran in her nephew's domain. The scene shifted to the gala, hours later, at a community center aglow with string lights and children's artwork. Zara moved through the crowd, her simple t-shirt traded for a modest dress, her curly hair still neatly tied back. Noah stood beside her, his suit understated but sharp, his hand brushing hers as they greeted guests. The cake from L'Etoile sat proudly on a central table, its intricate design drawing gasps from attendees. But the real surprise was Julian, standing awkwardly in a plain volunteer t-shirt, his blonde hair no longer slicked back, his hands fumbling as he served punch to kids who darted around him. A young girl, Amari, approached Julian, her small hands clutching a drawing of a sunflower. "This is for you," she said, her voice shy but bright. "Miss Zara says art makes people happy." Julian hesitated, his eyes flickering with something raw, memories perhaps of a childhood spent chasing his father's approval, never quite enough. He took the drawing, his fingers careful, and managed a quiet "thank you." Later, as the gala hummed with laughter and bids for the auction, Julian found Zara near the cake. His voice was low, almost lost in the crowd's chatter. "I was wrong," he said, his gray eyes meeting hers, unguarded for the first time. "About you, about this, I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man seeing beyond himself, perhaps for the first time. Zara nodded, her smile small but genuine. "It's a start," she said. "Keep showing up for them." She gestured to the kids, their laughter a melody of hope. Noah joined her, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining. They shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of the fight they'd won, not just for the cake, but for something bigger. The gala buzzed around them, the cake a symbol of triumph. But the true victory was the seed of change planted in Julian, in Clara, in the room that had once laughed. As the night closed, Zara and Noah stepped outside, the city's lights stretching before them. The stars above mirrored the hope in their hearts, a reminder that forgiveness and understanding could build bridges where prejudice had once stood. The story ended not with punishment, but with a chance for redemption, a chance for all to be better. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Zara and Noah's story, a tale of resilience, empathy, and the power of second chances. We hope it sparked something in you, whether it's a reflection on prejudice, forgiveness, or standing up for what matters. Share your thoughts with us. What moved you? What challenged you? Your voice matters. Until next time, keep believing in the possibility of change. See you soon. The threat hung heavy and the dining room seemed to hold its breath. Zara's hand tightened around her phone, her mind racing. She could walk away, call Noah, or find another way to secure the cake later. But that would mean delaying the gala, disappointing the kids, and letting this man's prejudice win. No, she'd fought too hard for her organization, for her community to back down now. Check the order, she said, her voice steady as stone. I'm not leaving without what I paid for. Julian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the air crackled with unspoken challenge. Clara's gaze darted between them, her hands frozen on the tablet. The diner's whispers grew louder, their amusement a sharp undercurrent. Zara stood alone in the center of it all, her heart a drumbeat of defiance, knowing this was only the beginning of a battle she hadn't expected to fight. Zara Okoye stood her ground at the hostess stand of L'Etoile, the weight of Julian Vance's threat, security escorting her out, hanging in the air like a storm about to break. The dining room's murmurs buzzed around her, a chorus of judgment from the well-dressed patrons who watched her like a spectacle. Her simple t-shirt and jeans, the faint streak of paint on her hand, marked her as an outsider in this polished world. But she refused to let their stares or Julian's arrogance shake her. The gala was 2 hours away, and the cake she'd come for was non-negotiable, a lifeline for the kids at her community center. Julian, his blonde hair catching the chandelier's light, leaned closer, his smirk sharp enough to cut. "You're not hearing me," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the foyer. "This isn't your kind of place. Why don't you save us all the trouble and go?" Zara's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the fire of injustice flaring inside her. She thought of her kids, Amari's bright sunflower, Malik's off-key piano notes, the hope she'd built brick by brick at Eastside Community Arts. She wouldn't let this man, with his tailored vest and entitled sneer, unravel it. "I'm here for a paid order," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "A custom cake for the Eastside Gala. I showed you the confirmation. Do your job and get it." A flicker of unease crossed Julian's face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by a mocking laugh. "A gala?" he said, turning to the diners as if inviting them into the joke. "You mean some little charity stunt? My father built L'Etoile for excellence, not for people like you begging for scraps." His words dripped with venom, each one a jab at her presence, her purpose, her very existence in his pristine domain. The dining room erupted in soft laughter. A woman in a silk dress at a nearby table hid her smile behind a wine glass, while her companion, a man with a gold watch, chuckled openly. Their amusement stung like a slap, But Zara held her head high, her eyes locked on Julian. She saw something in his posture, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his smirk wavered when he mentioned his father. This wasn't just arrogance, it was desperation, a need to prove himself in a shadow he couldn't escape. Clara, the young hostess, stood frozen behind the stand, her red ponytail bobbing as she shifted nervously. Her eyes darted to the tablet, where Zara's order glowed on the screen, undeniable proof. But she said nothing, her lips pressed tight, her fear of Julian's authority outweighing her guilt. Zara caught the girl's glance, a silent plea for understanding, but she knew Clara wouldn't speak up. Not yet. "I'm not begging," Zara said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the laughter. "I paid for that cake. It's for kids who deserve a chance. Kids your chef agreed to help when we placed the order. If you can't honor that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. A few diners paused, their forks hovering, their amusement faltering. Julian's smirk vanished, his gray eyes narrowing. "You're out of line," he snapped, stepping closer, his voice low and dangerous. "I run this place and I say who gets served. You're nothing but a disruption." He gestured sharply to a security guard near the entrance, a broad-shouldered man in a black suit, who began moving toward them. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a mix of excitement and disdain. "Get her out," Julian said, his tone final as if Zara were a stain to be scrubbed away. The guard's heavy steps echoed on the marble floor, each one a countdown to her humiliation. Zara's heart pounded, but she didn't move. She thought of the gala, the kids waiting for her to deliver, the trust they placed in her. Walking away wasn't an option, not when their futures hung in the balance. She tightened her grip on her phone, the email still open, a lifeline she wouldn't let go. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the guard's approach. "Check the order, Julian. You'll see I'm right."